the president made what are widely called unusual, perhaps unprecedented remarks in the modern era. And I'm going to show you exactly what he said and why military veterans and many other experts on a nonpartisan basis say this is one of those inflection points you need to confront. It is unusual to gather this many members of the military in peacetime. The president made this public address so everyone can see and hear what he is saying to them.
Portland, Oregon, where it looks like a war zone. They're brave in our inner cities, which we're going to be talking about, because it's a big part of war now. It's a big part of war. The radical left Democrats, what they've done to San Francisco, Chicago, New York, Los Angeles, they're very unsafe places, and we're going to straighten them out one by one. We should use some of these dangerous cities as training grounds for our military, National Guard, but military, because we're going into Chicago very soon.
Okay, so imagine you're watching live TV, right? You've got your coffee, maybe scrolling your phone, and suddenly you see a 4-star general standing in a room full of cameras, looking the president of the United States dead in the eye and calling him a traitor on national television, live. Yeah, that actually happened. I'm not talking about some anonymous source, not some leaked memo, not some book deal that drops 3 years later. I'm talking about October 2nd, 2025, General Mark Milley, one of Trump's own former top military commanders, at a military summit in Quantico, cameras rolling, telling the president that what he's doing is tantamount to treason. Can you believe this? Like, this is the kind of thing you see in a movie, except it's real, it happened, and the internet absolutely lost its mind. But before we go any further, real quick, let's be honest, you can't really trust headlines anymore. That's why we built Pump Politics, to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing, join us, be part of the community that actually cares about the truth. All right, let's get back to the video. Within hours, and I mean hours, the hashtag Traitor Trump was trending everywhere. Over 22,000 posts on Threads alone. Twitter was on fire. TikTok exploded. People were sharing clips, making memes, losing their minds over what they just witnessed. And here's the kicker. This wasn't just Milley going rogue. This was multiple top generals standing together, publicly refusing Trump's orders and telling him to his face that they're not doing it, that what he's asking for is unconstitutional, that their oath is to the Constitution, not to him. So what exactly did Trump ask them to do that was so bad that his own generals called him a traitor on live TV? Well, Trump wanted to use the military for what he called training grounds in Democratic-run cities. Yeah, he wanted to deploy troops into American cities, cities run by Democrats, for training purposes. Now, if that sounds insane to you, you're not alone, because the generals thought so too. Milley called it an abomination. Another general said it was unconstitutional. It basically told Trump, no, we're not doing that, and we're telling you no, right here, right now, on camera. This is wild. Like, think about what's happening here. We're not talking about policy disagreements. We're not talking about budget fights or strategic differences. We're talking about the president of the United States trying to deploy the military inside American cities, and his own top brass saying absolutely not. That's illegal. That's unconstitutional. And if we do that, we'd be the traitors. And Milley didn't hold back. He looked at Trump and said, our oath is to the Constitution, Mr. President. To betray that for any person, even you, is treason. Even you. That line right there, that's the line that broke the internet, because Milley wasn't just disagreeing. He was drawing a line in the sand. He was saying, I don't care if you're the president. I don't care if you're my commander-in-chief. I took an oath to the Constitution, and I'm keeping it. And if you want me to break that oath, then you're the traitor, not me. Come on. How did we get here? And of course, Trump fired back, because that's what he does, right? He can't let anything go. So he goes on Truth Social, calls Milley the real traitor. And then, and this is where it gets even crazier, he says that what Milley did was so egregious that in past eras, the punishment would have been death. The president of the United States suggesting that one of his own generals should maybe be executed. Are you kidding me right now? This isn't normal. Like, I know we say that a lot. I know everything feels insane these days, but this is actually not normal. This is the highest profile public rebellion against a sitting president by Pentagon leadership in modern American history. This has never happened before. Not like this. Not on live TV. Not with this many generals. Not with this much pushback. And here's what makes it even more important. This isn't happening in a vacuum. Trump has been pushing for weeks now to invoke something called the Insurrection Act. It's this old law that basically lets the president deploy the military inside the United States. And he's been trying to use it to crack down on protests, to send troops into cities, to basically turn the military into his personal police force. And the generals are saying, no, we're not doing that. That's not what the military is for. That's not constitutional. And if you keep pushing this, we're going to keep pushing back. So yeah, that's where we are. The president versus his own generals on live TV, with one side calling the other traitors and the whole country watching. Let's break this down. All right, so let's rewind a bit, because this didn't just come out of nowhere, right? This has been building for a while now. And most people, they're just seeing the headlines. They're seeing the clips. They're not seeing the full picture of what's actually going on here. So here's what you need to understand. Trump has been obsessed, and I mean obsessed, with using the military inside the United States. He's been talking about it for months. He's been pushing his advisors, pushing his cabinet, pushing anyone who will listen. He wants the Insurrection Act invoked. He wants troops in the streets. He wants the military doing domestic operations. And why? Well, that depends on who you ask. Trump says it's about law and order. He says democratic cities are out of control. He says crime is skyrocketing. Protests are getting violent, and local police can't handle it. So he wants to send in the military to restore order, as he puts it. But here's the thing, the numbers don't really back that up. Crime rates in most major cities are actually down compared to previous years. Protests have been relatively peaceful, and local police departments aren't asking for military backup. In fact, most mayors and governors are saying, please don't. We don't want federal troops here. We've got this handled. So if it's not really about crime, what's it about? Well, critics say, and this is where it gets uncomfortable, critics say Trump wants the military as a political tool. He wants troops loyal to him in cities that didn't vote for him as a show of force, as a way to intimidate opposition, as a way to flex power. And that's exactly what the generals are worried about. Because here's the deal. The military takes an oath to the Constitution, not to the president, not to a political party, to the Constitution. And part of that oath, a really important part, is that the military doesn't get used for domestic political purposes. The military isn't supposed to be the president's personal army. It's supposed to defend the country from external threats and not patrol American streets, because the president doesn't like how people voted. So when Trump rolled out this training grounds idea, the generals saw right through it. Trump's pitch was, okay, we'll call it training. We'll say troops are just doing exercises in urban environments. We'll frame it as readiness and preparedness. But everyone knows that's not what it's really about. It's about putting federal troops in democratic cities. It's about making a statement. It's about control. And the general said, nope, not happening. Now let's talk about Milley for a second, because his history with Trump makes this even more interesting. Mark Milley was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff under Trump. That's basically the highest ranking military officer in the country. And during Trump's first term, Milley had some serious disagreements with the president. There were reports that Milley pushed back on Trump's more extreme ideas. There were leaks about tense meetings. And after January 6th, Milley was reportedly one of the voices saying, we need to make sure the military stays out of politics. We need to make sure there's a peaceful transfer of power. Trump never forgot that. In fact, Trump has accused Milley before of being a traitor. He said Milley secretly communicated with China behind his back. He said Milley was part of the deep state. He said Milley was disloyal and should be investigated. So there's already bad blood here. And now with Trump back in office and pushing these military deployments, Milley is back in the spotlight, and he's not backing down. At this summit in Quantico, which was supposed to be a routine briefing, Trump apparently started pressuring the generals. He wanted commitments. He wanted loyalty pledges. He wanted them to agree to deploy troops domestically if he gave the order. And Milley, along with several other top generals, just said no, not in private, not in some closed-door meeting where they could quietly disagree and move on. They said no on camera, with journalists watching, with the whole thing being live streamed. Milley's exact words were, our oath is to the Constitution, Mr. President. To betray that for any person, even you, is treason. And then he doubled down. He said deploying troops into American cities for political purposes would be an abomination. He said it would violate the Posse Comitatus Act, which is the law that limits how the military can be used domestically. He said it would set a dangerous precedent and undermine the very foundations of civilian-military relations in this country. Other generals backed him up. They said the same thing. They made it clear, we're not doing this. And if you try to make us, we're going to resist publicly. And that's when the internet exploded, because people couldn't believe what they were watching. You had active and former military brass on live TV telling the president no, calling his plans unconstitutional, using words like treason and abomination. It was unprecedented. The hashtag Traitor Trump started trending immediately. Over 22,000 posts on Threads within just a few hours. Twitter was flooded with clips and commentary. Veterans groups were weighing in. Legal experts were analyzing what just happened. Political pundits were losing their minds. And Trump, oh, he was furious. He fired off a series of posts on Truth Social. He called Milley the real traitor. He said the generals were part of a conspiracy against him. He accused them of being disloyal, of being part of the resistance, of trying to undermine his presidency. And then he went further. Trump posted that what Milley did was so egregious that in times gone by, the punishment would have been death. Yeah, He said that the president of the United States suggesting that his own general might deserve execution. Now Trump's defenders will say he was just being hyperbolic. They'll say he was making a historical point about how treason used to be punished. They'll say he wasn't literally calling for Milley to be executed. But come on, you can't say that. You're the president. You can't suggest even casually that your political opponents or military leaders should be killed. That's banana republic stuff. That's authoritarian playbook 101, and it scared people because here's what everyone's thinking. If Trump is willing to say that publicly, what's he saying privately? What's he planning? How far is he willing to go to get what he wants? And that's why this matters so much. This isn't just a fight between Trump and some generals. This is a fight over what kind of country we are. This is a fight over whether the military answers to the Constitution or to one man. This is a fight over whether we have checks and balances or whether the president can do whatever he wants. And right now, the generals are saying no. The Constitution wins. We're not crossing that line. But Trump's still pushing. He's still talking about the Insurrection Act. He's still talking about deploying troops. He's still talking about showing strength and restoring order. So the question is, what happens next? Does Trump back down? Do the generals hold the line? Does this escalate? And that's what we need to talk about. Okay, so let's break this down into what actually matters here. Because there's a lot of noise, a lot of outrage, a lot of people yelling on the internet. But what are the real stakes? What's actually happening? And what could happen next? Here are the key points. Point 1. This is the most public military pushback against a sitting president in modern history. Like we've had disagreements before. We've had generals who privately oppose presidential decisions. We've had leaks in books and anonymous sources. But we have never had top military brass stand up on live TV and tell the president, no, you're wrong. What you're asking is unconstitutional, and we're not doing it. That's a huge deal, because the military is supposed to be apolitical. The whole system is built on civilian control of the military. The president is the commander-in-chief. The military follows orders. That's how it works. Except the military also takes an oath to the Constitution. And if the president gives an order that violates the Constitution, the military is supposed to refuse. That's the check. That's the balance. And that's exactly what Milley and these other generals are saying. They're saying Trump's orders cross a line. They violate the Constitution. So we're not following them. But here's the problem. That puts the military in an impossible position. Because now they're making political decisions. They're deciding which orders are constitutional and which aren't. They're publicly opposing the president. And that opens up a whole can of worms about who's really in charge. Trump supporters are already saying the generals are staging a coup. They're saying the deep state is trying to undermine the president. They're saying this is proof that the military is corrupt and disloyal. And Trump's critics are saying no, the generals are doing their job. They're protecting the Constitution. They're standing up to an authoritarian power grab. So who's right? Well, legally, the generals probably are. The Posse Comitatus Act is pretty clear. The military can't be used for domestic law enforcement except in very specific circumstances. And Trump's training grounds plan doesn't fit those circumstances. It's almost certainly illegal. But politically, this is a disaster. Because now you've got half the country thinking the military is staging a rebellion, and the other half thinking the military is the only thing standing between us and dictatorship. And that fractures trust, that destabilizes everything. Point 2, Trump's response makes everything worse. Look, Trump could have played this smart. He could have said, okay, I hear your concerns. Let's review the legal issues. Let's find a way to work together. Let's de-escalate. But that's not what he did. Instead, he called Milley a traitor. He suggested Milley might deserve the death penalty. He doubled down on his plans. He went full scorched earth. And that tells you everything you need to know about where Trump's head is at. He's not backing down. He's not compromising. He's treating this like a loyalty test. You're either with him or you're the enemy. There's no middle ground. And that's dangerous because it means this is going to escalate. Trump's going to keep pushing. The generals are going to keep resisting. And at some point, something's going to break. Maybe Trump tries to fire Milley and the other generals. Maybe he tries to replace them with people who'll do what he wants. Maybe he tries to invoke the Insurrection Act anyway and see who follows orders. Or maybe Congress steps in. Maybe there are investigations. Maybe there are impeachment talks again. Maybe the courts get involved. But one way or another, this doesn't just go away. Point 3, this could shift public opinion in a big way. Here's something people aren't talking about enough. Trump has always had strong support among military families and veterans. That's been one of his core bases. People who've served, they tend to lean conservative. They tend to support Trump. But this changes the calculus. Because now you've got top generals, people with decades of service, people with combat experience, people who've dedicated their lives to the military, saying Trump is dangerous, saying he's violating the Constitution, saying what he's doing is wrong, and that might make some military families rethink their support. Polling data shows that trust in the military is still really high in this country. People respect generals, they respect military leadership, So when those leaders say Trump's out of line, people listen. Now, will that be enough to flip Trump supporters? Probably not. Trump's base is loyal. They've stuck with him through everything. They're not going to abandon him because some generals disagree with him. But swing voters, independents, moderate Republicans who are already uncomfortable with some of Trump's behavior, this could be the thing that pushes them away. And in a close election, that matters. Point 4. The Insurrection Act fight is far from over. Trump is still pushing to invoke the Insurrection Act. He's still talking about deploying troops, and he's not going to stop just because some general said no on TV. So the question is, what's his next move? Does he try to find different generals? Does he go around the Pentagon? Does he try to use other federal forces like DHS or the National Guard? And what do the generals do if he actually invokes the Insurrection Act? Do they follow orders? Do they resign in protest? Do they openly refuse and face consequences? This is uncharted territory. We don't have a playbook for this. We don't know what happens when the president and the military are in open conflict like this. But here's what we do know. This is a constitutional crisis in the making. This is about fundamental questions of power and authority and the rule of law. And it's happening in real time on live TV with the whole country watching. So where does this go from here? Honestly, nobody knows. Trump could back down. He could pivot to something else. He could decide this fight isn't worth it, or he could dig in. He could make this his hill to die on. He could turn this into the defining fight of his second term. And if he does that, if he really pushes this, then we're looking at a full-blown showdown between the president and the military. We're looking at court battles, congressional investigations, maybe even talk of the 25th Amendment or impeachment again. This is huge. This is historic. And this is just getting started. One thing's for sure, this story isn't going away anytime soon. The generals drew a line, Trump crossed it, and now we're going to see what happens when an unstoppable force meets an immovable object. Stay tuned, because this is about to get even crazier.